What's going on, everyone? It's Brian here with DrinkABeerandPlayAGame, and today I will be presenting you guys with the top 6 NES horror games. If you haven't checked out my top 6 Atari horror games video, be sure to click the link below. Now, before we jump into this list, I should mention that I am keeping the choices to one game per franchise, and that the games are in no particular order. This was a tough list to make, as there are a lot of great games for the NES. But one spoiler I will mention is that I have a separate list for Famicom exclusives. So, if you don't see a game you love, be sure to mention it in the comments. And why don't you click that like and subscribe button too? We would really appreciate it. Now let's get into these 8-bit horror classics. Whenever someone says NES and horror in the same sentence, we all think the same thing: Castlevania. But the question is, which one is going to make it on this list? Now, I have a deep nostalgia for the original Castlevania. From the moment the opening screen shows the castle to the damn near perfect soundtrack, there is a lot to love about this game. But it has its flaws. Then there's Castlevania 2. Which gets a bad rap for some of its mechanics and secrets, but once again, it has an A+ soundtrack and great graphics. But my pick for this list has to be Castlevania 3 Draculas Curse. It's undoubtedly the best game in the series on the NES. With 4 characters to choose from, branching paths, improved controls, this game just got it right. I love the boss fights, and the different playstyles for each character keeps you coming back wanting to discover every way to play this game. And of course, the graphics and sound, it just made what was already great even better. To anyone that is new to the series, I will always recommend the first game, but for those who know, there's no way I couldn't choose Draculas Curse. But once again, I really need to reiterate, if I wasn't doing one game per franchise, then half of this list would be these Castlevania games. They're all great. Next, I'm going with a point-and-click adventure game, which I normally do not enjoy. However, the NES did have a few solid horror selections in this genre, and while I like Maniac Mansion, it was a little too goofy for me, with a little bit too much going on, and I never felt like it was a true horror game, almost more sci-fi goofiness. And then you have Shadowgate, which is a favorite for most, but once again, I always looked at this as more of a fantasy game, so I am going with the spiritual successor, The Uninvited. The game starts you in a car crash, which you must escape from, or you will burn to death. And soon you will find a creepy mansion that you need to explore. And since you know my love for Resident Evil, I couldn't resist loving this game. The mansion is filled with all types of ghosts, bugs, and demons that want to kill you. The first time I came across this lady, I legit got a jump scare because I didn't even realize that this was a full horror game. Point-and-click games are always clunky on the NES, but somehow I was able to figure out what to do and beat this game. Some of the most fun in this game is figuring out all the different ways to die. Either way, it is a perfect spooky game, right in time for Halloween. To the shock of no one, I had to include Friday the 13th. Now right off the bat, let me say, this is not a great game, but it has really great ideas that are just not that well executed. The whole game takes place on Camp Crystal Lake, and you have to switch between 6 camp counselors, with the goal being to save the children and defeat Jason Voorhees. I like the visuals in this game, even though for some reason Jason is purple, and the sound is well done, but what I really love is the non-linear style of the game. Each counselor has to find certain objects and weapons in order to defeat Jason, and there's no obvious choice as to who you should pick first. And while you're going around trying to discover things, you will hear the Jason alarm go off. This can add a lot of tension and suspense. If you are not prepared, then you can expect to see the greatest end screen of all time. For me, the oddest choice in this game is the punch-out style combat with Jason when you fight him in the cabins. I will not claim this game is perfect, but I can see what they were going for, and I am a Jason mark at heart. You can see a more detailed breakdown from our review in the links below, but at the end of the day, it's really not as bad of a game as people give it credit for, if you can overlook some of the goofiness. Alright, who remembers Monster in My Pocket from the 90s? This media franchise spawned trading cards, toys, and of course, a video game. As a kid, I tried to collect all of the toy monsters, but I never did complete that collection. Plus, I never had the volcano display. But man, looking back at these toys, they really weren't that great. Still, I have always had a lot of love and nostalgia for anything monster related, so naturally, when I heard that they were turning this toy line into a video game, I nearly shit my pants. Developed by Konami, this game has a great presentation. Even though some of the color palettes are a bit bland, the soundtrack reminds me of the TMNT Tournament Fighter on the NES, and it just has that Konami sound. The premise is that the Warlock has decided to shrink every monster who will not follow his orders, but he accidentally shrinks all the monsters, and he decides to send the bad ones after you. Now you have the option as playing the vampire or the monster. Both play exactly the same, and if you have a buddy, you can actually play together. Like most Konami games of the time, this is a platformer that will have you battling plenty of familiar monsters. Each level has a really cool boss fight, and the control in the game is surprisingly well done. The game is short, which I always appreciate, and for you monster lovers out there, I think you will really enjoy this one. Next up is a game I have mentioned for a few years now, Monster Party. Released by Bandai, this is such a weird little game that has you playing as a kid named Mark who needs to help this griffin monster named Bert defeat a bunch of monsters in the dark world. You are armed with a bat, and as you progress through the first level, it will suddenly shift on you, turning into a nightmarish landscape. You can literally see people's asses sticking out of the ground. The game finds a great balance between goofy and scary. While you will face plenty of traditional monsters, you will also face some odd choices like fried food, shrimp, and walking pants. Most levels have multiple bosses, which was always my favorite part because I couldn't wait to see what was going to come up next. As you make your way through the levels, you will be able to find power-ups that allow you to transform into Bert, so you can fly and shoot fire at these unholy abominations. If I'm being honest, the control for Mark is a little stiff, but the presentation and goofy nature of this game always wins me over. I would definitely say give it a try. This is a fun one. The final game for this list is A Nightmare on Elm Street. Now last year I streamed my first time playing through and I made a review. Once again, you can check the links below for that. And I had heard a lot of negative opinions of this game. But I have to be honest, I really enjoyed this one. Developed by Rare and published by LJN, the presentation is great, but man, the soundtrack is impressive. Just listen to this. The game is a unique take on the film series, as you play a teenager who must collect all the bones of Freddy in order to destroy him once and for all. The game actually allowed you to play with 3 other people, utilizing the Fourscore. But come on, no one had one of these. Still, it's a kinda cool feature. As you traverse Elm Street, you will need to explore various houses, cemeteries, junkyards, and eventually the dreaded boiler room. The bosses are interesting, but the real fun is when the Freddy meter is full. Similar to Jaws, once that meter is full, the alarm goes off, and now you're having a one-on-one encounter with Freddy. This happens a few times throughout the game, and they can be kind of fun. The dream meter in the game reminds me of Castlevania 2, because once you enter the dream world, the enemies become more numerous and take a few more hits. But the payoff here is that you can find power-ups which are only able to be used in the dream world. These power-ups are all interesting and they have their place, but the ninja is by far the best. There is a lot going on in this otherwise simple platformer, and while it may be difficult, I would say it's worth a playthrough. That will do it for today's video. It was really tough chopping down my original list of games to only 6 entries, but at the end of the day, I feel this is a good representation of the best horror games available on the NES. Come back next week as we check out the top 6 horror games exclusive to the Famicom. Cheers, guys.